Also,
what I wanted to see is the recording fast. Okay. Because usually what happens, recording is on and first 10 minutes is nothing.
yeah.
That's why I just want to pause it. And or the so okay. So we can share this. So I just because if I'm here.
And then you have the pointer, so when you go
Pointer, I can.
the students usually prefer the pointer. Okay, that one. Then there's a pointer, just clear from them.
Okay.
You have to start the recording.
Just
You know how to
so,
do it,
yeah.
huh? Because I want to bring the attendance sheet.
Yeah, no problem. But the students are able to unmute themselves. If they want to ask questions, they can unmute. Huh? Yeah, so just make sure that. So allow.
So I think this is
Yeah. Do you need to? Should I bring this curtain down? Because I think this will not be very clear to you.
I think it's here.
Oh. Is that better? So all of you can hear me. Those who sitting in the room at the back, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And all of you who are online, can you see the shared screen? And also, whenever you have to say something, just unmute yourself and say it. I'm not following the chat.
Yes.
Okay. And can you hear me clearly?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, doctor.
Okay, good. So during the lecture, if you have any question, just unmute yourself and ask the question, okay? Because I won't be following the chat, so just ask me. Okay, good morning. Today we will be talking, also let me start the recording. Okay. So good morning. Today we will be talking about the anti-protozoal drugs. So far you have done most of the protozoa in microbiology, and that's why we switched today's lectures. So I was preferring that you finish your microbiology and then we do the pharmacology. Okay. So our objective is to classify the antiprotozoal drugs based on their activity, and we discuss the mechanisms of action, clinical uses, and adverse effects of important antiprotozoal drugs. So, you know, the protozoa are unicellular organisms, but they are eukaryotes. And you have done other antibiotics, and you must have noticed in their mode of action, so our main advantage is that the bacteria are prokaryotes and our cells are eukaryotic cells. So we have many differences, so we can utilize those differences and we can use antibiotics which selectively attack only the bacterial cells and does not harm us. But the problem here is the protozoas are eukaryotes, so it's difficult to treat them compared to bacteria. And also you must have realized, so we have fewer choices in treating them, and those drugs may have a higher toxicity for humans. And during from your microbiology lectures, you must have understood that most of these infections are caused by unhygienic conditions. And their transmission, like especially for the human pathogens, usually it's fecal-oral, and then there may be certain other vectors and certain other routes. So prevention is very important. So hand hygiene and the water hygiene is very important. So we will talk about different groups, like the antiprotozoas which are used to treat different diseases. Malaria we won't talk about today because the antimalarials are covered in hematology block, which you will take in semester 5. So that's where you do malaria and antimalarials. Did microbiology cover malarial parasite as well?
Yes.
Because it's usually done in hematology block. Our major focus would be on amoebiasis. And that's very common infection. So our major focus would be around amoebiasis and its treatment. And then we'll briefly talk about giardiasis, trichomoniasis, leishmaniasis. And if time permits, we'll talk about treatment of toxoplasmosis and trypanosomiasis as well. Why this is not going away? So talking about amoebiasis, it's an infection of intestinal tract caused by Entamoeba histolytica. Now, amoeba has many species. And can you name some?
Entamoeba coli.
Sorry?
Entamoeba coli.
Entamoeba coli. Okay. Did you do that in microbiology?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you talk about Entamoeba dispar? Okay. And did you talk about other amoebic species which don't affect intestine, but like Acanthamoeba?
Acanthamoeba was mentioned.
Okay. And Naegleria fowleri?
Yes, that was mentioned.
Yeah. So there are other species, and those can be very important, like Naegleria fowleri and the Acanthamoeba. But we won't go into the treatment of those infections today. Our major focus would be Entamoeba histolytica. Any idea what does it do?
It attacks the intestinal tract.
Okay, intestinal tract. Okay.
Was bloody stool. Bloody stool.
Sorry?
Bloody stool.
Bloody stools. Okay. So it will lead to a diarrhea which will be bloody. Okay. What else it can do?
It can
Sorry? Meningitis, yes, it can affect CNS, but like very rarely, not very common. Another organ which is commonly affected, liver. Okay. And those who are online, if you want to answer something, you can unmute yourself and just answer. Just make sure that if someone already is talking, don't interrupt that person. But otherwise, you can unmute and answer, no problem. So it exists in two forms. One is cysts, which survive outside the body, and that's the one which leads to transmission from one person to another person. And we have invasive trophozoites. This you must have done in microbiology, okay? And these trophozoites cannot persist outside the body. And these are the ones which cause invasive disease. So it can cause asymptomatic intestinal infection, so kind of a colonization, and people can become chronic carriers. So the cyst form stays there and they become chronic carriers, and they keep excreting those cysts, and they keep transmitting infections to others through fecal-oral route, through contaminated water, but they are asymptomatic. So it can cause asymptomatic intestinal infection. It can cause invasive disease, and the most common would be the colitis, which would lead to dysentery, as you said, as diarrhea with blood in stools, and a lot of mucus as well, a lot of crampy pain. So it's like a crampy diarrhea. It won't be a big volume diarrhea, like in cholera, it's a big volume diarrhea, but in this one, it's not big volume, but it's a crampy abdominal pain, diarrhea, mucus, blood. And it can cause also invasive disease in other organs, so we call that extraintestinal disease, because the common thing is intestinal, so the all other forms are called extraintestinal. And the most commonly affected organ, or the most important extraintestinal disease, is amoebic liver abscess. Okay. So you must be familiar with the life cycle. So here you see you have cyst, and is ingested by the humans, of contaminated like food or water, and then there's excision in small intestine. Then it can, these trophozoites can either like become again encystate, and they keep excreting. So this cycle can continue, and this can cause disease. So it can be like cause invasive amoebic colitis or amoebic liver abscess, or they can remain as asymptomatic carriers. So what is this top figure on your right hand side?
Trophozoite.
Cyst. And the lower one is? Can you see the 4 nuclei in the cyst? Okay, so now let's come to our pharmacology. So what are anti-amoebic drugs? Any idea?
Drugs against diseases.
Yeah, which drugs? Any idea? Can you name some? Yes. Who said that? Okay. But can you name a drug? The reason I'm asking, because it's a very common drug. I'm sure most of you must have tested it in your life sometime, because it's, again, most common. I call it most commonly abused drug. Yes, metronidazole, also known as Flagyl. Are you familiar with that? So it's a very commonly used drug. So we have, like as our friend said, tissue amoebicides for invasive infection, and the most common is metronidazole, and the same group. So these are nitroimidazoles. So most commonly used is metronidazole, and the other one is tinidazole, and we have other in the group as well. And then we have luminal amoebicides, which kill amoeba and the cysts in the lumen, but they don't get absorbed, so they are ineffective on the invasive infection, but they can kill them in the lumen of the gut. So they include iodoquinol, diloxanide furoate, and paramomycin. And then we have other tissue amoebicides, which are not commonly used, or a long time back they were used, but now we have better alternatives like metronidazole. So in most of the situations in invasive infection, drug of choice is metronidazole. But like the other options were, which can be still used in very specific situations, which is chloroquine, which is another anti-malarial. So you will do the details of chloroquine with anti-malarials, and emmetine and dihydroemmetine. So when it comes to treatment, so what should be our approach? So someone who's asymptomatic carrier, like you do a stool DR and you find cysts and amoeba histolytica cysts, but he has no symptoms, then what to do? Should we give them a course of luminal agent or not? So they say in endemic areas where it is very common in the developing world, or the countries where the people call them like third world countries, in those areas they say no need to treat, because even if you treat, they will get reinfected because it's so common over there. So if they are carriers, no need to treat. But if you find a carrier asymptomatic infection in non-endemic area, then you should treat, because whenever they are carrier, there's always a risk of invasive infection. Anytime the trophozoites can invade and cause invasive infection. It can cause colitis, it can cause amoebic liver abscess. So there is a risk. But in endemic areas, because it's so common, so like you don't treat unless it causes disease. But in non-endemic areas, somehow during probably travel somewhere, this person got it, Now, if he comes back here and you do stool testing for some reason, and if you find the cysts are there, you treat it. The reason is because of risk. The other reason is because of public health concerns. Because even if they are asymptomatic, they will keep transmitting it to others. So because if it is not common here, so it's better to treat any asymptomatic area. There's another entamoeba called entamoeba dispar, which can be considered as a normal flora, can be found in the when you do stool dialysis on a stool, you can find it. It doesn't cause any symptoms, and it's not treated. So it may be a normal finding. But sometimes when you see a report of stool examination and you see entamoeba dispar, so this is something different. Entamoeba histolytica is different. So you don't treat entamoeba dispar if it's asymptomatic. Now, when it comes to therapy, so we have nitroimidazoles. So among them, metronidazole is the mainstay of therapy for invasive amoebiasis. Okay. Remember that. This is the mainstay of therapy. If it is invasive amoebiasis, that means if it's causing dysentery or invasive colitis, or is it causing amoebic liver abscess. Sometimes it can go to lungs or brain, so that's very rare situations. The other alternative is tinidazole, again for the intestinal and extraintestinal amoebiasis. Metronidazole has like around half-life of 7 to 8 hours, and tinidazole has a half-life of slightly like around 12 to 14 hours, so slightly longer half-life, and probably more tolerable. But again, metronidazole is more effective and is more commonly used. So the first choice would be metronidazole. We have other nitroimidazoles which have very long half-life, including this secnidazole and ornidazole, but they are not commonly used. So don't worry about their names. And by the way, in the end, you will get anyways the list of drugs which you're supposed to remember. But like here, like these very long-acting ones, secnidazole and ornidazole, you don't need to worry about them. So metronidazole is active against a broad array of anaerobic. So now this metronidazole is not only for the entamoeba histolytica. It is very effective. It's the mainstay of our treatment, drug of choice for the treatment of invasive amoebiasis. But this drug is also used for the treatment of other conditions. So especially for anaerobic bacteria, it's very effective against anaerobic bacteria. So metronidazole is active against a broad array of anaerobes, protozoans, and microaerophilic bacteria. It's a drug of choice for treating invasive amoebiasis. It kills trophozoites of entamoeba histolytica in the intestine and tissue, but does not eradicate cysts from intestines. So it's not able to completely kill the cysts. So still, when you treat somebody with metronidazole, someone who has invasive amoebiasis, still 50% of the people would still have cyst forms persisting in their gut. So it does not eradicate the cyst form completely. So that's why this treatment with metronidazole needs to follow up with a luminal agent. So sometimes they give it together. There are many combination forms available where both drugs are in the same pill. So sometimes they are given together. Sometimes, like usually it is recommended that you finish your course with the metronidazole and then you follow up with diloxanate furoate or isopropanol or parabomycin for another 10 days. It depends which one you are using. So either you follow up or you use it alongside. But you need to use a luminal agent as well. So metronidazole exerts its antimicrobial effects through the production of free radicals that are toxic to the microbes. It produces free radicals and that kills these microorganisms. So let's go into the details of mode of action. So metronidazole is taken up by most of the cells, whether they are aerobes or anaerobes, but it gets activated in the anaerobic microorganisms. So we have certain proteins which are present in anaerobes, and through that metronidazole gets reduced. So there is oxidation reduction reaction. So it takes up the electrons. So this ferridoxin gets oxidized, and the metronidazole gets reduced. This reduced version or the metabolite of metronidazole is the active form, which produces a lot of toxic radicals, which attaches with DNA and breaks the DNA, and that leads to cell damage and cell death. So activity against most obligate anaerobes occurs through 4-step process. Because this is our major focus, so I'm spending more time on these, and then we'll go into other things. So first step is the entry into the microorganism, and I said the metronidazole is a low molecular weight compound, so it diffuses across the cell membranes of microorganisms. And then there's a reductive activation by intracellular transport proteins, and it's activated by reduction by the microbial flavodoxins and ferridoxins found in anaerobic bacteria and certain protozoans. Okay. So reduced intermediate particle interact with the intracellular targets. So this is the third step where the killing happens. So the activated reduced metronidazole molecule binds non-specifically to bacterial DNA, inactivating the organism's DNA and enzymes and leading to a high level of DNA breakage. So it produces breaks in the DNA, and that leads to the cell death. And the fourth step is like the breakdown of the cytotoxic intermediate product. So whatever like the active form of metronidazole again gets deactivated. And again, even if the oxygen becomes available, it will become again oxidized and it will become inactive, because it became active by reduction reaction. So if you oxidize it, it will again become inactive. And it also is also cytotoxic to facultative anaerobes as well, such as Helicobacter pylori, which you will do details in the GI block. Probably you'll do in microbiology here as well, but you will do with in your third year in GI block. H. pylori infection, which causes gastric ulcers, and Gardnerella vaginalis. So these are facultative anaerobes, and it's also effective in those conditions, but we are not sure how does it work in that situation. And again, the killing rate is concentration dependent. More, if you increase the concentration, the rate of killing is higher. Mammalian cells are unharmed because they lack flavodoxins and ferridoxins that reduce the nitro group of metronidazole. Okay, reduction happens at the nitro group of the metronidazole. Okay, so that was the mode of action. In short, it gets activated in the anaerobic conditions, in the anaerobic bacteria or protozoa by reduction reaction, and produces cytotoxic radicals, induces DNA breaks, leads to cell death. Yes. Can you be a little bit louder? I cannot.
I said, does the reduced form of the drug affect the healthy cells around it after cell death?
No, it should not. Like obviously there will be some effect, because not the drug, but the free radicals which are being produced, that can harm other cells. And obviously, if it is working in protozoa, it's already in the eukaryotic cells. But what you're talking about, if it goes out the active form and in our mammalian cell, our own cells, so will it be harmful? The drug will become again, as I said, oxidized and inactive. Either the intermediates will decay within those cells, and if this drug will enter in our body as well, like in our cells as well, but it doesn't get activated in our cells because we have oxygen over there, and we don't have these intermediate proteins which reduce this drug. But suppose if a reduced form goes into the cells, again, it should not harm. It can harm like in a limited way, but as soon as it interacts with oxygen, it will get oxidized and it will be inactive. So it should not harm, like it should not produce that kind of harm. But obviously, all these drugs which produce side effects, their side effects come because there is some harm. Okay, so is this clear? Those who are online, is this clear? If you have any question, just unmute and ask. So the good thing about metronidazole is, or the important thing, as one thing I said, is the concentration dependent rate of killing. Number two, the oral absorption is very good. Like the bioavailability with the oral intake is almost 100%. So that's very good thing about this drug. So usually, like because with bioavailability is usually less with oral form, but here in metronidazole, it's very good. So it will get absorbed. But obviously, if someone is having nausea, vomiting, cannot take the medication, then you have to start an IV. So we have IV forms as well. And sometimes in hospitalized patients, we give IV form of the metronidazole. But usually in amoebic colitis, liver abscess, the oral form is equally effective. So we don't have bioavailability issue with this. But we have some adverse effects, including nausea, headache, dry mouth, bitter metallic taste. And in some people, it's really bad, including myself. I cannot tolerate it. But in others, it doesn't produce any problem. And peripheral neuritis, and it can be sometimes serious. Disulfiram-like effects. So especially those who are using, like drinking alcohol, when they take metronidazole, so they get certain side effects, which happen like with disulfiram. So we should avoid alcohol during that. So we are talking here in context of the entamoeba histolytica and amoebiasis, but it has other uses. So what are its uses? One thing is amoebiasis and you have to use it with or followed by luminal amoebicidal. It is also useful in giardiasis. You have done giardiasis? Okay. It is caused by giardial ambia. Trichomonas vaginalis, and here you have to treat both partners. Anaerobic infections is the mainstay of therapy for anaerobic infections. Pseudomembranous colitis. Have you heard this term? Especially in reference to antibiotics. So with antibiotic use, there's the overgrowth of C. difficile. So that C. difficile is sensitive to metronidazole. So that's again the drug of choice for pseudomembranous colitis is metronidazole. And if it is resistant, then we have other options. Ulcerative gingivitis, Helicobacter pylori infection. So it has a lot of clinical uses. But it is also, in many countries, is very widely used without any proper thought. So it's kind of abuse. Like all the kids who present with diarrhea, they start them on this metronidazole, which is not appropriate. Like all diarrhea is not because of amoeba or like any organisms which are sensitive to metronidazole. So, and most of the diarrhea is viral in kids, but they start them on metronidazole. So that's why I said this is very commonly used and, in my opinion, is abused drug. So what are luminal amoebicides? So this was the metronidazole, which is for the invasive disease. The luminal amoebicides, we have iodophenol, dialloxanide furet, and paromomycin. Again, all three are used. Again, it can be personal preference. Personally, like I most commonly use dialloxanide furet. But in literature, paromomycin is also commonly used in certain countries, in others, idoquinol. So diloxanate furoate is an effective luminal amebicide, but is not active against tissue trophozoites because it is not absorbed in the tissue. It remains in the gut. So unabsorbed diloxanate in the gut is the active anti-amoebic substance, effective for asymptomatic luminal infections and like for carrier states. And it is used with a tissue amebicide, usually metronidazole. So with or followed, so after the metronidazole. So first you treat with metronidazole and then you follow up with tissue amebicide. And sometimes you can use it with, like, there are many combinations with diloxanate furoate, like metronidazole plus diloxanate furoate in the same pill. So it can be used with it as well. Adverse effects: flatulence, nausea, abdominal cramps, rashes. Paromomycin, it's an aminoglycoside. Again, it's not absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract. Effective against luminal forms of Entamoeba histolytica. Directly, probably due to its effects on the cell membranes, causing leakage. And it has some indirect effect by reducing the intestinal flora as well. Now, paromomycin, one reason for using paromomycin after the metronidazole is sometimes it itself can cause diarrhea, paromomycin. Now, if you're using with the metronidazole, someone who has dysentery, now you don't know whether the metronidazole is not working and the same dysentery is continuing, or is it the side effect of paromomycin, diarrhea because of that. So it's better to use. And also, if there's severe diarrhea, then the barrier is broken. You don't want this drug to be absorbed as well. So if there's a lot of shedding in the GI tract, so your gut barrier may be broken and this drug might get absorbed as well. So it's better to use at least paromomycin after the metronidazole. Diloxanate furoate can be used with it or after it. So we have certain other systemic amebicides for the tissue forms. One of them is chloroquine, and may be used in certain situations to treat amoebic liver abscess. It eliminates trophozoites in the liver abscess. It gets concentrated in the liver, so it's effective against the liver abscess. But again, the drug of choice for liver abscess is metronidazole. So this is only like sometimes if the patient is not responding, then you might add chloroquine to it, or you might just switch to chloroquine if there's a failure with the metronidazole. Or if there's a situation where the patient cannot take metronidazole, like there's a contraindication or intolerance, or suppose in pregnancy, it's a bit controversial whether to use metronidazole or not. So there are only in certain situations you can use it. And the other tissue systemic amebicides would be emetine and dihydroemetine. Again, they are very toxic. However, drug of choice of amoebic liver abscess is metronidazole, followed by luminal agent. Again, you have to follow with even for the liver abscess. At the end of the treatment with liver abscess with the metronidazole, you have to give luminal agent because this patient would have cysts in the colon. Chloroquine has also been used for patients with hepatic amoebiasis, and dihydroemetine has been also successfully used, but because of potential myocardial toxicity, it's not preferred. So we don't use emetine dihydroemetine very commonly, very rarely. So amoebic liver abscess in pregnancy, in that situation, because it's this category B, so it's a bit controversial. So we use it only in severe illness if it is very important. And the other alternative would be using chloroquine in that situation, if someone has liver abscess and pregnant. And then you have to obviously do the luminal agent as well. Chloroquine reaches very high liver concentration, and so it can be effective. And it's obviously not effective for intestinal or other extra hepatic amoebiasis. And it works by inhibits growth by concentrating within the acid vesicles of the parasite thereby increasing the organism's internal pH. It also inhibits the organism's hemoglobin utilization and metabolism. So we have certain adverse effects like pruritus, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, blurry vision. Chloroquine is known to cause certain retinal problems, but like you will do that detail later, I think, with antimalarials. I won't ask you much about the side effects of chloroquine. You should remember that it can cause hemolysis in patients who are G6PD deficient. So we don't use this in patients who are G6PD deficient. Emmetine and dihydrometine, these are alkaloids, alkaloid derivative from ipecac, and dihydrometine is a synthetic analog. And again, they are effective against tissue trophozoites. And because of toxicities, we are not using these. Only in certain situations where metronidazole is not working, then you might use it. And we don't use it in the IV version. We give it either sub-Q or IM. It inhibits peptidyl tRNA translocation, inhibiting the elongation of the peptide chain, inhibiting the protein synthesis. Again, it's not very selective for the protozoa, so it causes a lot of toxicity in the humans, okay? And that's why we are not using it. Okay, so in the anti-amoebic drugs, for the asymptomatic cyst carriers, if you are in a non-endemic area, you use luminal agent. Which are luminal agents? Iodoquinol, paramomycin, or diloxanide furet. Okay. If it's an invasive disease, whether it's diarrhea or dysentery, invasive colitis, or amoebic liver abscess, in both situations, you treat it with metronidazole, and along with or followed by diloxanide furet or paramomycin or like any luminal agent. Okay. With the diarrhea, you can use with metronidazole or followed by amoebic liver abscess. Usually, you first treat the liver abscess with metronidazole and then you give the luminal agent. Okay. Giardiasis, you know, again, it's a infection of small intestine, causes diarrhea, caused by Giardia lamblia. Again, this diarrhea is commonly called backpacker's diarrhea because it happens sometimes in the travel as well. And it's spread by the contaminated food and water. So again, it's a person-to-person contact or fecal-oral contact. Treatment, metronidazole or tinidazole. Again, whatever we spoke of metronidazole, tinidazole is similar. So we won't talk about the details of tinidazole. So tinidazole can also be used for amoebiasis. But our, again, drug of choice is metronidazole. That's what we use. Similarly, here in giardiasis, metronidazole and tinidazole both can be used. Trichomoniasis. It's caused by Trichomonas vaginalis. Have you done this?
No.
No? Okay. It affects both males and females, and it's transmitted by the sexual intercourse, mainly by vaginal intercourse. And in females, it is usually symptomatic. It can be asymptomatic, but it's usually symptomatic, and it can cause, like, it's very common. And sometimes it can cause severe vaginitis, leading to greenish purulent discharge, and also burning pruritus. And there can be vulvar or cervical lesions, and there can be abdominal pain, dysuria, dyspareunia. So this happens when like you have symptoms, but again, it can be asymptomatic as well. And many times it's asymptomatic. But in males, it's usually asymptomatic, but sometimes it can cause urethritis, prostatitis, and epididymitis. But when it's asymptomatic, people don't know and they keep transmitting. It can also get transmitted just by skin contact as well, but usually as a result of intercourse. Again, drugs, metronidazole is our drug of choice. Tinidazole can also be used, and both sexual partners are, whatever the number of sexual partners, they need to be treated. Because if you treat one partner who is presenting with symptoms, But if the other partner is asymptomatic, again they will transmit. So you need to treat the partner as well. Now leishmaniasis is transmitted by Is there a name to that scent plant? Otherwise, why would I ask? It's written there. You did it today or yesterday?
Today we did it. It's leishmania in the name.
Is there any particular fly or I'm confusing some? Those were online. Those were online. Any idea? Sorry?
Philo Thomas.
Is that the fly? Not sure. Okay, so it's transmitted.
Lotozomia.
No. Which fly? Like this? Which scent fly? Like it transmitted by the bite of some vector. So what is the name of the vector? Okay. So okay. So whenever you can just look at. Sorry.
Bromastegoid?
I'm not sure. So look it up. Okay. So it has different forms. It can cause disease in different varieties. So which are? Yeah, cutaneous, mucocutaneous, and? No. And visceral. So cutaneous, mucocutaneous, and visceral, which they also call Kala Azar. Affects liver and spleen, causes hepatomegaly, splenomegaly. So again, sorry?
Was it CC fly maybe? The CC fly?
I think that's the one. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that was the name I was thinking of. So again, there are a few drugs that we use for the treatment of leishmaniasis. One is amphotericin B, and especially for the visceral one, this is the drug of choice. So basically, it's an antifungal drug. So probably you will do it in detail when you do antifungals. Have you done antifungals already? Yeah, so you will do the details of amphotericin B because this is the major antifungal drug for the systemic fungal infections. This is a systemic drug used for systemic fungal infections. But it is also a drug of choice for visceral leishmaniasis. And the mode of action is because the fungi, they have ergosterol in their cell membranes. We have cholesterol, they have ergosterol. Fungi. And so the leishmania also has the same thing. So it binds to these ergosterol and forms pores in the cell membranes. So because they become leaky, they become permeable, and then the ions shift across, and that leads to cell death because of the change in ionic concentrations. It leads to cell death. So that's its mode of action. It's not absorbed through the intestine, so given intravenously. It's not water soluble, so it was administered as a suspension with the help of deoxycholate. Its half-life is 15 days. And now we use liposomal amphotericin B. What is this? What happens in order to improve the tolerability of amphotericin and reduce toxicity? It's toxic, especially nephrotoxic. Several lipid formulations have been developed. So this is liposomal amphotericin B. Liposomal formulations have been found to have less renal toxicity than deoxycholate form and fewer infusion-related reactions. So, but the problem is this liposomal form is expensive. So the cheaper one is the amphotericin B deoxycholate, but now we have in most of the hospitals I've seen liposomal amphotericin B being used. So this is the drug of choice, liposomal amphotericin B, just amphotericin B for visceral leishmaniasis. And the adverse effects would be acute reaction, and it's caused by amphotericin B causes release of tumor necrosis factor, alpha and IL-1 from the host immune cells. And that's what leads to chills, fever, aches, nausea, vomiting, dyspnea, acutely, like at the time of injection. Also, important side effect of amphotericin B is nephrotoxicity. Besides this, hypokalemia, thrombophlebitis, thrombocytopenia, anaphylaxis, okay, and anemia. The other drug which is common or important is the sodium stibogluconate for the treatment of leishmania. It's a pentavalent antimony, and it's again used for the treatment of leishmaniasis, and it can be used in all stages. And it acts by inhibiting the glycolysis and fatty acid oxidation. We are not sure about the mechanism. This is a hypothetical, like most likely this is how it does. And it's administered IM or IV, and it can cause cardiac arrhythmia, especially because of the QT prolongation, and causes nephrotoxicity as well. Okay. The third drug that is used for the leishmaniasis is miltefosine. Don't worry, in the end we'll give you a list and we'll decide like which ones you need to remember. Amphotericin B, of course, yes. And the other one, the sodium stibogluconate, yes. We'll decide on this one. But you should know, like, this drug is also very commonly used. Because even if we don't ask, in USMLE, you will encounter this drug. So you should be familiar with this thing. It's not just about exams. We need to learn things. So again, it can be used in all these forms, but again, people who haven't treated for Kala-Azar and still they have cutaneous lesions, that's where it's commonly used. And again, the exact mechanism is not known. Likely interaction with phospholipids and steroids in the parasitic cell membrane, inhibiting the inhibition of cytochrome C oxidase and apoptosis like cell death. Toxoplasmosis. Are you familiar with toxoplasmosis? Did you do this in microbiology? Toxoplasma gondii. Okay, this is another protozoan infection. And again, we use the antifolates here. Pyrimethamine and sulfonamides, especially sulfadiazine. That's the combination that is used, pyrimethamine and sulfadiazine. It has synergistic activity because it causes the sequential blockade of the two steps of the folic acid synthesis. You remember folic acid synthesis? Have you done the antibiotics?
Yes.
So you know how the sulfonamides work? Huh?
Yes, we should do.
What do you call that? Septron. So the sulfadiazine, so because there are two steps, so pyrimethamine and sulfadiazine block those two steps of the dihydrofolate reductase, and if you remember those steps. So these come under the category of antifolates. So you can use pyrimethamine with clindamycin, or you can use pyrimethamine with sulfadiazine as a regimen of choice for the prophylaxis as well as for treatment of toxoplasmosis. And obviously, because these are antifolates, so you don't want, it can cause hematologic toxicity, so you can give folinic acid to take care of those side effects. And it has lots of toxicity as well, like gastric irritation, glossitis, hematotoxicity, including megaloblastic anemia. And because of clindamycin, there can be pseudomembranous colitis as well. Trypanosomiasis. It's last infection, okay? You have done trypanosomiasis. That I'm sure. I spoke with Dr. Mohabbat. She was going to do it either today or yesterday. Trypanosomiasis. Do you know about sleeping sickness?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we have pentamidine. So it's commonly used in the, so again, it has different stages. It has hemolymphatic stage. So in that stage, you can use pentamidine, and this In many books, you'll just see the arsenicals as a treatment, especially in Kaplan. You will see in trypanosomiasis, it says pentamidine, arsenicals. So it's actually the drug is melarsoprol, but the category is it's an arsenical. It inhibits enzyme sulfhydryl groups, and it's used for mucocutaneous forms, for which you cannot use the pentamidine of trypanosomiasis, and the CNS stage as well. And it enters the CNS, so it is the drug of choice for the African sleeping sickness. Okay, because it is affecting the CNS, and this drug can go into CNS. Pentamidine cannot go. Okay. And I think this is the last drug, nifurtimox. And again, it inhibits a parasite unique enzyme called trypanothione reductase. And it's a drug of choice for the American trypanosomiasis. So that was the African trypanosomiasis. Then now you have another American variety, which is called by Trypanosoma cruzi. Do you remember its name?
Yes.
And it's also called Chagas disease. Okay. And it's also effective in mucocutaneous leishmaniasis. And obviously there are some toxicity as well, and that's it. I'll just upload the slides in a while because I have to modify this reference. The slides are from the not from the Rangendale but from other book.
Check if there are questions, Doctor. More chat.
No, I asked them to unmute and ask.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's say phlebotomy.
So they were contributing to your lecture.
Yeah, but I asked them to unmute and ask the question, answer the question. Which, so I've stopped the recording.
Yeah, just yes.
And then I'll just
Stop sharing. For all.